Nice full house. I'm going to give a disclaimer if you're here hoping that I'm going to be sharing something real deep and oh, I've never heard that before. I hate to disappoint you, but it's not going to be quite on that level. Sometimes Yeshua used parables to speak very deep things. And that's kind of what I'm going to draw a little bit from today. In light of what Pastor Kelly's been sharing with lately on our relationship to the Torah, there's been that scale that he shared week after week about, where we are as far as being lawless, without God, wicked, and the other end of the scale being perfect, Torah keeping, like Yeshua. Sometimes I find myself during the week wondering, where I'm at on that scale and where do I place myself. Would you consider yourself mature in the faith? And that's kind of a loaded question. And where on that scale, where do you fall that you could say that you are mature? And I don't know about you, but oftentimes when you look at that scale and you wonder where you are, you tend to judge yourself based on maybe where everyone else is on it. So are we measuring our maturity horizontal or vertical? And he's had that laid out on a horizontal, but I want to flip it up today onto a vertical level. Horizontal being when we're comparing ourselves to each other, and vertical, how are we lining up with God and our maturity? Because I tend to find myself basing my walk kind of where everybody else is. That tends to be the habit. I look at, okay, well, I'm doing better than somebody else is, or I'm not measuring up where somebody else is, and that's really the wrong way to be looking at it. Reminded of this verse in 2 Corinthians 10:12, it says, "For we dare not to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves, but when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they have no understanding." So here Paul's talking about, number one, we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to others. But more than that even, we really shouldn't be comparing ourselves to ourselves. I've also been guilty of doing that. I go, well, look at where I used to be and look at where I am now. And so I'm starting to measure myself by myself and my own definition of where I've grown. But when my eyes are on where I used to be, and I've came from here and I'm moving here, my eyes aren't really on the goal. They're not on the goal. They're not on him. Recently, I heard somebody singing a song, and it's a song I've heard this particular person sing over and over and over again over the years, and it's gotten to the point where when I hear it, it's like I've heard it so many times I just don't pay attention anymore. And it's an old song called "Consider the Lilies." And it's drawn from this verse, Matthew 6:28, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these." This portion in his Sermon on the Mount, Yeshua is talking about two different things. He's talking about what we could call the animal kingdom. Then he's also talking about the plant kingdom. And it's like he is wanting his people to his kingdom to look and say, now look at these two kingdoms and how they are. And there's so much that we can draw off of and so much we can learn from the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom. And that word consider the lilies of the field, when I looked it up, and I'm not going to bring up the Greek word on it or the Hebrew that it's compared to, but the definition is kind of to learn thoroughly, examine carefully, to consider well, or to learn by use and practice. So when we're considering the lilies, we're to learn from them thoroughly, examine them carefully, consider them, and learn. We can learn from them by use and practice. So was this a suggestion or a command to his disciples to sit and consider the lilies? So in this message, I'm going to go to the plant kingdom, and we're going to learn a few lessons perhaps from them. And I'm drawn to this because in our Siddur every Shabbat, we read from Psalm 1 through 3, that says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the Torah of Adonai, and on his Torah he meditates day and night. And he will be like a planted tree by streams of water, producing its fruit during its season. Its leaf never droops, but in all that he does, he succeeds." So in light of this, considering the plant kingdom, this passage also jumped out at me as we're measuring our maturity and our walk with the Lord. And I want to take a moment and pull some simple but deep lessons from Psalm 1 through 3. So I titled this one, Like a Tree. Take a look at this picture for just a moment in regards to maturity, and you look at this and you say, well, which one's the more mature of the two? You've got this little fella up here that looks pretty small and insignificant, sitting next to a very large, what appears to be mature tree, but we can't really see the whole picture there. I have no idea what the state of that tree is. For all we know, it could be dead, could be cut down. We're just seeing a part of it. So he will be like a planted tree by streams of water, producing its fruit in its season. Its leaf never droops, and all he does, he succeeds. A real quick comparison drawing from this. The tree is compared to an individual, and the Lord does this often in Scripture, comparing people to trees. The stream, or the water, is compared to the Torah. We can say that the fruit is our obedience to the Torah, or what the Torah brings out when we obey it, the fruit of it, the fruit of the Spirit. And we could say that the leaf could be kind of our measure of growth. I'm back to that previous picture. The few leaves and the many leaves, we can say one is grown as farther along in its growth than the other. And 2 Peter 3, he says, "Since you already know this, loved ones, be on your guard so that you are not led astray by the error of the lawless and lose your sure footing. Instead, keep growing in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah. To him be the glory both now and to the day of eternity. Amen." And Peter's talking here in context. He's talking about those that misunderstand Paul's hard writings, some of the things that he says, and they tend to take those sayings of his and turn them into lawlessness, turning them to bring them away from God's law rather than closer to it. And he's saying, since you know, though, that that's not what he's intending to do, don't be led astray by the error of the lawless, those without God's law, but keep growing in his law, in his knowledge. We know that the perfect Torah, the perfect Word of God, was Yeshua. So here's a picture. Two trees. We're on the horizontal level looking at them, and we ask which one's the greater of the two. And a lot of it's really on our perspective. The one further over there looks small and insignificant, but it's because of where we're standing in relationship to it. And oftentimes those around us that seem the greatest in our lives are just because we're closer to them. And just because someone is further off and we don't understand their walk or where they're at doesn't mean that they're any less. But when we take that horizontal and we flip it up on the vertical on how the Lord looks at it, now can you tell which one's the greatest? And do any of them even come close to him? So one note I took from this and considering this is, a tree is planted. It doesn't select where it wants to grow. Think about that. Not a tree out there decided, oh, I'm going to be planted right here. It was a lot of other factors that weighed in on where that seed wound up. And with people, it's the same way. I didn't choose to be born in the United States of America and Arizona and then wind up, none of us decide where we're going to be planted. God puts us where we're to be. I couldn't decide I wanted to be born in Pakistan or Kenya, and I couldn't choose to be born in Israel either. But a tree planted by the stream has several advantages. And I would compare the tree planted by the stream, somebody that's been planted next to the Torah as, kind of the Jewish person that has been planted very near to it. And it has advantages being very close to the water. Drought isn't a concern. There's no lack of nutrients. Romans 3 says that what is the advantage of being Jewish? Or what is the benefit of circumcision? Much in every way. First of all, they were entrusted with the sayings of God. We know the Torah was given to the Jewish people, and really when you think about it, the entire Bible was. But kind of looking at this, there's so much advantage to being by that water. Here's looks what appears to be a vast wilderness. There's not a bit of water in it. It's kind of like this world. There's very Torahlessness, very without God's law. And then there's a stream running through it. And if you're planted by that stream, you stand a chance of surviving. But that doesn't mean that every tree out there has to be by that stream in order to survive. So a person planted away from the stream still needs something for survival. Those of us that are not planted next to that stream, we could wind up a lot like this without water, without God's law, and that's how the world's doomed to wind up. But there are several options for that tree out there that could have survived. One option is, that the water can be brought to it from the stream. And this was what God intended and ordained Israel to do, was to take the water, the Torah, and bring it to the nations. Deuteronomy 4, it says, I have taught you statutes and ordinances to do in the land that you are about to enter to possess. You must keep and do them, for it is your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the peoples, who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has God so near to them, as Adonai our God is whenever we call upon him? And what great nation is there that has statutes and ordinances that are righteous, like all of this Torah that I am setting before you today? Again, Israel was to bring water to the peoples that were far away from God's way. But, they failed somewhat in their calling of that. But there is a second option for surviving out there, and that's sorry about that. It's water from the heavens. Romans 1 says, because what it can be known about God is plain to them, for God has shown it to them. His invisible attributes, his eternal power, and his divine nature have been clearly seen ever since the creation of the world, being understood through the things that have been made, so people are without excuse. So in some way or another, his Torah is given from the heavens through his creation. Some of the way he intends his people to live is revealed And he goes on in Romans 2 and says, "For when the Gentiles who do not have the Torah do by nature the things of the Torah, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the Torah. They show that the work of the Torah is written in their hearts." So one option, is water can be brought from the stream, brought to it. And some of us have had that privilege of being around very close to some Jewish people that can give a lot of insight into God's ways. Really, to some degree, we've all had that because we all have His Word. And the second is, He can reveal it from the heavens. But there's a third option too. And really, the best solution to being away from the stream is to be transplanted to the stream. Because, when you think about it, people can fail to water. People can fail us in so many ways to teach us. And I know in my life that has been the case in a lot of the congregations I've been in. There's been a failing to bring the whole counsel of God. And as you know, anybody that deals in agriculture at all or keeps a garden, it doesn't rain all the time. So really, the best way is being by that stream where your leaf won't droop or wilt. Romans 11 says, "If the first fruit is holy, so is a whole batch of dough. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them, and became a partaker of the root of the olive tree with its richness." And he goes on from there. But more than just transplanting, he's talking a lot about being grafted in. In other words, something's being cut off of an old root and being brought into a new root. And really, that's the hardest thing, I think, for some of us in our journey in this has been leaving the roots behind of what we used to know. Sometimes the hardest thing is unlearning the bad things you knew or things that were incorrect. And then when you're transplanted or brought in and grafted in to a new root stock, there's that what they call transplant shock. And that can look like it's not going to make it at times, and you wonder about it. But God can do the work. Because we say this every week. At that time, you were separate from Messiah, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope, and without God in the world. But now in Messiah Yeshua, you who once were far off have been brought near by the blood of Messiah. So all of us, have been out in the wilderness, excluded from that stream. We were excluded from Israel and the strangers to the covenants. And we can only survive by His Torah, by His water, wherever it is that we are planted. So we can either, one, wait on someone to bring it to us. Two, we can wait on the heavens to reveal His ways to us, or be grafted into a better root. But besides that, really taking a look at the plant kingdom that has a lot more to teach us. Many of us may feel that we are further along than perhaps others. And I know in our congregation, we've got some people that are brand new to this, don't understand a whole lot. It's all very new. We have some that are very experienced, been around it a long time. And then some of us that are kind of, I don't know where I'm at in the whole thing. I feel like I'm way back on the scale still, maybe not quite at the beginning, but when I look at him and his ways, I don't feel like I've really come out of the ground a whole lot at all. But for those that are called to teach, looking at trees, there's 5 basic things that a tree needs that you can provide it. One is water, and fertilizing it, staking it, weeding around it, and pruning it. So when you think of watering it, if you're called to teach or to share with others, sometimes we can dump so much Torah on someone at one time, like this, that they drown. And even a mature tree like that, when it's buried in water that quick and that hard, may not survive. And watering, it needs to be slow sometimes, needs to be deep, needs to be dripped on a little bit at a time. Give the roots a chance to get some air and take it in a little bit at a time. And that's sometimes we can get so excited in all of this that we just want to dump it on everybody all at one time, and it can end up pushing people away. You need to be careful about that. Then fertilizing. When you look at this is a plant that's been over fertilized. There's been so much nutrients dropped on it all at one time that it ends up burning it. And sometimes we can put out so many nuggets of information in such a heavy dose that it can create some burn, actually stop growth. And it takes a while sometimes for an individual or a tree for that matter to snap out of it and begin to grow again. Even Yeshua knew this when he told the disciples, I still have much more to tell you, but you cannot handle it just now. And that takes some real wisdom, and when we're sharing with others, to know just how much they can take at one time. There's also staking. The whole purpose of staking is that the tree's young and vulnerable, and to prevent storms uprooting and breaking branches, or even snapping the tree off. Galatians 6:2 says, bear one another's burdens, and in this way you fulfill the Torah of Messiah. I know some in our congregation are going through some real storms right now, and that's an easy thing that we can do, is to come alongside each other and kind of be that strength. Two are better than one, and a threefold cord isn't easily broken. And then there's this. When you look at this, what kind of damage this is from on this tree? It's really from a weed eater. Been going around it for so long that it's ended up cutting into the tree, and this tree very well could die. And when it comes to weeding, need to be really careful with this one, because it may or may not be our job in this particular instance. When he talks in Matthew, he says, no, for while they ask him, should we go out there and uproot the tares that have been in there with the weeds or with the wheat? And he says, no, for while you are gathering up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At harvest time, I will tell the reapers, first, gather up the weeds and tie them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. So it's something, as we're helping others along, we need to be careful who we attempt to uproot around them. A lot of damage can really be done when we think we're doing God a service by uprooting the weeds or the people that we say you need to get away from everybody and start over. That can do a lot of damage too, because at the same time, be aware of who you are growing alongside with. Pruning. That kind of hurts. The removal of dead, unproductive parts. But sometimes pruning is also the removal of living growth. So there's certain things that appear to be growing that sometimes have to be removed out. And again, this is another one that we have to be really careful with when we're attempting to do this in someone else, because God himself does the best pruning. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he trims so it may bear more fruit. So we really can't see the best parts to prune in others, but God trims out the growth and forms it into what he wants us to be. Really, the goal really of it all, doing all those 5 things, is growth, because growth brings fruit. But fast growth produces a weak tree. I know I desire to grow fast. I get carried away in that sometimes. I want to learn all I can so quick and read everything I can read, watch everything I can watch, and dump so much in all at the same time. But it's the fact that the fastest growing trees are the weakest ones. And they normally don't live very long. They come up real quick, but they don't last near as long as a slow growing one. Because, during ideal conditions, when everything's just right and the right amount of water, the right amount of fertilizer, no bad weather, everything can grow really good. But then, a storm comes up. And when all that growth has been so fast, it hasn't had a chance to strengthen itself and root deep in what it just learned or picked up, it can snap very easily. And trees have growing seasons. During the summer, where there's water, warmth, sunlight, nutrients, everything can grow really well, and that's how it is in our lives when all the parts of our life are going well, and no real trials or struggles, or we can take off and we really think we're going someplace. But I look at this picture and it's like, wow, that's really pretty. And sometimes the best colors, some of the best times in our life when we appear to be doing the most and we're really showing off, is right before the winter sets in. And we need to take heed when we're giving off good color, because cold season could be right around the corner. And we all go through those seasons, because when we're in the winter and it feels like we're not growing much and we wonder where God is, it's because we need the sun. Trees need the sun. That's pretty self-explanatory. We need the sun. We need Yeshua to shine forth for us and to bring spring around again. Another thing, trees do better in groups. A lone one's susceptible because it's exposed to the wind, to the heat, to lightning strikes. But groups, when we're together, we're not trying to go it alone in our journey and in our learning, and we come along beside each other. Our roots can intertwine. We can draw strength off of each other. And that's been a blessing, I know, in our journey and our walk, is we're not alone in this. And we know that all of you are along with us. Because, the biggest trees began as a seed too. When we are comparing ourselves to each other, it's not wise, because we're all in different stages. And the biggest tree started out just as a seed as well, small and insignificant and not mature at all. So, which one are we closer to? The little one, or like I said, the big one, we can't really tell because what that big one's like, because for all we know, it could be dead. And I look at that and I wonder, well, I wonder why he's growing right there, because it would be a pity if, and this is something I have a fear of, is that I ever had to be taken out so someone else can get the sun. And I never want to be in a position like that to where I'm blocking the sun from shining through to somebody else. Because really the biggest trees are only slightly closer to the sun. I mean, looking at this, it's like none of them are even remotely close to it. We are so far from the goal, each one of us, and there isn't a single one of these trees out here, or one of us, that will ever be able to attain the sun. And there's only two solutions really to that, and that's unless it's brought to the sun or the sun comes to it. And one of two ways, we stay the course, that we'll either be brought to him or he's going to come to us. And we'll finally attain what the whole goal was. So don't compare where you are to others. You're only slightly better, perhaps, or slightly less. And fruit takes time. When a tree first sprouts, it doesn't put fruit on immediately. And I was reminded there was a portion that we read last night from Luke 13. It says, when Yeshua began telling this parable, a man had a fig tree he had planted in his vineyard, and he came looking for fruit on it and found none. So he said to the gardener, indeed, for 3 years I've come searching for fruit on this fig tree and found none. Remove it. Why does it use up the ground? But answering, the gardener said to him, Master, leave it alone for this year also, until I dig around it and apply fertilizer. And if it bears fruit, good. If not, cut it down. The section we read last night was where he comes out to the fig tree and sees no fruit on it and curses it. And, in the Torah, you weren't allowed to take fruit from the tree for 3 years. And he's saying here for 3 years, he's looked for fruit to start developing, and there hasn't been anything. But in that 3 years, there was patience. And it takes patience, both with others, when we don't see what appears to be fruit right off the bat, we need to give patience with others, but also with ourselves. Obedience, in my opinion, it takes time and it takes practice. This walk has taken some time. We've been at it, I guess, a little over 3 years now, and it's taken some practice to get used to what it's really like to obey the whole counsel of God. But at the end, we have to bear fruit. There comes a point where we have to bear fruit, or we will be cut down. So don't take it as an excuse. Well, it just takes time. It just takes time, and one day I'll get there. And because we are known by our fruit. And kind of, looking back at all that, slow growth is okay, because fast needs the most amount of care. It takes the most tending to. You got to be careful with it. So as long as we are growing, slow growth is okay. And there will be seasons of growth, and there'll be seasons where we're not growing. We can't grow without the sun. So if we're attempting to grow, just in the Torah alone, in somebody else, it's not going to work. We can only grow with him when we're keeping our eyes on the author and finisher of our faith. And we have strength in others. And we need to remember that we came from a seed. And that we're only perhaps slightly better, or bigger, I should say, or smaller than each other. We're all On God's level, we're all way, 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 way down there. Back to Psalm 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the Torah of Adonai, and on his Torah he meditates day and night. And there is a companion verse to this, and I don't have it up there, but over in Jeremiah 17, in case you wondered who was the author of Psalm 1, in Jeremiah 17, verse 5, it says, Thus saith Adonai, Cursed is the one who trusts in man, and depends on flesh as his arm, and whose heart turns from Adonai. For he will be like a bush in the desert. He cannot see goodness when it comes, but will dwell in parched places in the wilderness, a salt land where no one lives. So that whole, blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the wicked, the sinners, the scoffers, he's comparing over here in Jeremiah 17, that's like a bush. That's like something that's not grown to any kind of status. It's out in the middle of the desert. Can't see goodness. In a very dry and thirsty place. In the Psalm, going on in Psalm, it says, But the one that delights in the Torah of Adonai, and he meditates on his Torah day and night, he will be like a tree planted by streams of water, producing its fruit during its season. Its leaf never droops, and in all he does, he succeeds. And it goes on again over here in Jeremiah 17, verse 7, it says, But blessed is the one who trusts in Adonai, whose confidence is in Adonai. For he will be like a tree planted by the waters, spreading out its roots by a stream. It has no fear when heat comes, but its leaves will be green. It does not worry in a year of drought, nor depart from yielding fruit. Comparing that, delighting in his Torah, over here in Jeremiah 17 is really the same as putting trust and confidence in the Lord. When we're delighting in his ways and in his instruction, and we're putting our trust and confidence in him, because if he's leading us, our trust and confidence is in his leadership, not our own. And one thing I always like doing with Psalm 1 through 3 is, I did this a long time ago and I thought it was helpful as a reverse reading of it. So down there at the bottom, if you want to succeed, then your leaf can't wilt. If the leaf doesn't wilt, you'll have fruit. And the fruit needs water, and the best water is at the stream. The stream is the Torah, but in order for that to work, you have to be at it day and night. And you can't be at the Torah or at the stream day and night if at first you don't delight in it. You have to delight in it. And if you delight in it, you won't sit in the seat of the scoffers. And you won't sit in the seat of the scoffers if you don't first stand in the way of sinners. And you won't stand in the way of sinners if you don't first walk in the counsel of the wicked. And if you don't walk in the counsel of the wicked, it's really there that we'll truly be blessed.